Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late night, harbored a deep-seated resentment toward comedy legend Bob Hope that simmered beneath the surface of their seemingly cordial on-air relationship for decades. Picture this: the pristine Tonight Show set, Johnny's immaculate desk gleaming under the studio lights, a forced smile plastered across his face as Hope delivers yet another recycled monologue from cue cards held just out of frame. How could a man who welcomed thousands of guests with genuine warmth develop such animosity toward one of America's most beloved entertainers? What invisible line was crossed between these titans of television that turned professional courtesy into private contempt? And why, despite their shared network and overlapping audiences, did Carson guard this truth so carefully until long after the camera stopped rolling? Before he became a household name, John William Carson was born in Corning, Iowa in 1925, a Midwestern boy with a shy demeanor and a magical touch. His childhood fascination with magic tricks evolved into a genuine talent for entertainment that would eventually captivate America for 3 decades. After serving in the Navy during World War II, Carson worked his way through local radio and television in Nebraska and California, honing the quick wit and disarming charm that would become his trademark. His big break came in 1962 when NBC tapped him to replace Jack Paar as host of The Tonight Show, launching what would become the longest and most successful reign in late-night television history. For 30 years, Carson defined the art of the talk show. His opening monologues became a nightly ritual for millions, his comic timing impeccable, his interview style the perfect blend of curiosity and restraint. The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, collected 42 Emmy nominations and 6 wins, with Carson himself inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 1987. His influence extended beyond ratings. He launched careers with a simple nod or invitation to the couch, turning unknown comics into overnight sensations. His personal brand of sophisticated yet accessible humor transformed late-night television from a novelty into an American institution. Bob Hope's trajectory had begun earlier and reached even greater heights of celebrity. Born in England in 1903 and raised in Cleveland, Hope had conquered vaudeville, Broadway, radio, film, and television long before Carson took The Tonight Show helm. By the 1,960 seconds, Hope was an American icon, beloved for his USO tours, entertaining troops, his successful film career, including the road movies with Bing Crosby, and his annual Christmas specials on NBC, the same network that broadcast Carson's nightly program. With 58 television specials between 1,954 and 1,994, Hope held the Guinness World Record for the most honored entertainer in broadcast history. Hope's comedy style was firmly rooted in the vaudeville tradition, rapid-fire one-liners, topical jokes about current events and politics, and a carefully crafted persona that remained consistent across decades. His trademark persona, the cowardly, girl-crazy wise guy with impeccable timing, had served him well from World War II through Vietnam. By the time Carson took over The Tonight Show, Hope had already been awarded 5 special Oscars, had a theater named after him at the Motion Picture Academy, and was a perennial ratings powerhouse for NBC with his comedy specials. The network executives viewed Hope as television royalty, a national treasure whose annual Christmas broadcasts and other specials were not merely programming, but events that defined NBC's identity. When Carson arrived at the network, Hope had already established himself as NBC's most valuable property, with direct access to network heads and unprecedented creative control over his appearances. This power dynamic would prove crucial in the years to come, as the rising star and the established legend found themselves repeatedly crossing paths in NBC's corridors of influence. On the surface, these two NBC stars shared much in common, both masterful comedians with impeccable timing, both immensely popular with middle America, both wealthy and powerful within the entertainment industry. But beneath this apparent alignment, the first wobbles of discord were already forming, invisible to the viewing public but increasingly apparent to those within their inner circles. The initial spark occurred in 1963, barely a year into Carson's Tonight Show tenure. The setting: NBC's Burbank Studios, where Hope had arrived for what was supposed to be a standard guest appearance. Carson, still establishing his authority in Jack Paar's former domain, had prepared questions and sketched possible comedy bits with his writing team. But when Hope arrived at the studio, he brought something unexpected, his own team of writers and a pre-written segment that essentially hijacked Carson's show format. For 20 minutes, Hope dominated the program with prepared material, treating Carson's show as if it were merely another platform for his own brand of comedy. Studio executives, deferential to Hope's seniority and star power, allowed the intrusion without consulting Carson. To the audience at home, everything appeared normal, two comedy giants sharing a stage. But backstage, Carson's producer, Fred de Cordova, witnessed the host's tight-lipped response and the quiet fury in his eyes. "That's not how we do things here," Carson reportedly told de Cordova after the cameras stopped rolling. "Not on my show. Not ever again." It was the line that couldn't be uncrossed, a fundamental breach of talk show etiquette that revealed a profound difference in how these two men viewed their craft and their relationship to their Selson audience. The studio that night buzzed with tension. As cue cards were whisked away and cameras powered down, Carson retreated to his dressing room without the customary post-show small talk. His longtime talent coordinator, Jim Fowler, noted the unusual silence. "Johnny had this way of going cold when truly angered," Fowler later recalled in a 1994 interview with Television Quarterly. "Not explosive, not demonstrative, just a stillness that was somehow more concerning than any outburst." That night after Hope left, he was absolutely still. The incident underscored a fundamental clash of performance philosophies. Hope approached television as he had approached vaudeville and radio, as a platform for delivering polished, pre-written material to an audience. Carson, conversely, saw The Tonight Show as a more intimate medium, one where authentic interaction and spontaneity were paramount. In Hope's prepared takeover, Carson had glimpsed not just a single act of disrespect, but an existential challenge to his entire approach to television entertainment. By 1967, Carson had fully claimed The Tonight Show as his own, setting clear boundaries with guests and establishing rituals that would define late night for a generation. In February of that year, Hope was booked for another appearance following his Vietnam USO tour. The tension crystallized during pre-show preparations when Hope's team delivered a list of demands: specific camera angles, pre-approved questions, and most egregiously to Carson, a guarantee that Hope's segment would run a full 30 minutes regardless of how the show was flowing. Carson, known for his meticulous approach to television, saw this as another fundamental misunderstanding of the talk show format. "It's conversation, not a monologue," he told his staff, visibly irritated. On air, viewers might have noticed Carson's slightly stiffer posture, the fewer genuine laughs, the lack of the customary invitation to move down to the coveted spot beside his desk. Industry insiders recognized the subtle snub, but to the average viewer, it registered as nothing more than a slightly off-rhythm episode. The backstage dynamic that night revealed deeper tensions. Hope's longtime publicist, Frank Liberman, had commandeered the green room, transforming it into a temporary office where Hope's writers frantically updated jokes based on the day's headlines. Carson's own team found themselves sidelined, their careful preparation for the interview rendered irrelevant by Hope's self-contained performance machine. Ed McMahon, Carson's loyal sidekick, later confided to Tonight Show writer Raymond Siller that the host had paced his office before the show, muttering, "He thinks it's 1948 and we're still on radio." The dynamic worsened in 1973 when Carson, at the height of his power, renegotiated his NBC contract to unprecedented terms, ownership of his show, a reduced 4-day work week, and approval over any rebroadcasts. Hope, whose own specials were high-rated but expensive productions for NBC, reportedly complained to network executives about Carson's outsized influence and compensation. During a network affiliates meeting in New York, Hope made a pointed joke about certain stars who work less and earn more than God himself, a thinly veiled reference that quickly made its way back to Carson. The Waldorf Astoria Ballroom, where the affiliates meeting took place, had been decked in NBC peacock colors, network executives, and station owners mingling over cocktails and canapes. Hope, scheduled to deliver a brief comedic address, worked the room beforehand with practiced charm. Witnesses recalled his delivery of the barb not in his prepared remarks, but dropped casually during a seemingly impromptu moment at the podium, giving it the veneer of spontaneity while ensuring maximum impact. Carson, though absent from the event, received multiple calls about the comment before Hope had even left the stage. Their professional overlap created another friction point in 1976 when both men were considered to host that year's Academy Awards. Carson, who had successfully hosted in 1974, was the Academy's first choice, but NBC executives pushed for Hope, who had hosted the ceremony 18 times previously. The behind-scenes maneuvering became a power struggle that Carson ultimately won, hosting to critical acclaim while Hope was relegated to presenting a special tribute segment. At the governor's ball afterward, photographs captured the two men in the same room, but never in conversation, their orbits carefully managed by publicists and handlers. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion glittered that night with Hollywood royalty. In one corner, Carson held court, his Oscar-hosting triumph adding another jewel to his crown. Across the room, Hope circulated with his wife Dolores, his fixed smile betraying no hint of the professional disappointment he had endured. Network president Herbert Schlosser briefly attempted to engineer a photo opportunity between the two NBC stars, but Hope's longtime agent, Howard Minsky, smoothly intervened. "Bad timing," he murmured to Schlosser. "Maybe next year." Both men understood there would be no next year for such a photograph. The most public slight came during the lead-up to Carson's 10th anniversary special in 1972. The milestone broadcast featured tributes from dozens of entertainment luminaries, but noticeably absent was Bob Hope, despite being NBC's biggest star. When questioned by the press, Carson's team cited scheduling conflicts, but industry insiders knew better. Hope had indeed been available, but wasn't extended an invitation. When reporters asked Hope about the omission at a charity golf tournament in Palm Springs, he delivered a response dripping with subtext. "Johnny's doing just fine without my help. Some of us are just too old-fashioned for today's television, I guess." The Indian Wells Country Club that day presented the perfect backdrop for Hope's calculated response, surrounded by wealthy admirers on the sun-drenched 17th hole, a setting that emphasized his elder statesman status and leisure-class credentials. The assembled press corps, initially there to cover the tournament, seized on the Carson comment, transforming a routine charity event into an opportunity for Hope to subtly frame the generational and stylistic divide between himself and the late-night host. But here's where it gets complicated. Despite their private animosity, business necessities kept bringing them together. NBC's programming strategy required its biggest stars to cross-promote, meaning Hope would continue to appear on Carson's show roughly once a year, each time arriving with pre-written jokes and minimal interest in actual conversation, precisely the approach Carson despised in talk show guests. A particularly telling incident occurred during a 1979 appearance promoting Hope's NBC special, Bob Hope on the Road to China. The Tonight Show set was unusually tense that evening, with Hope's writers hovering just off camera. Carson, determined to conduct an actual interview about Hope's historic visit to China, repeatedly tried to engage his guests with genuine questions about Chinese culture and politics. Hope, visibly impatient with this deviation from his prepared routine, kept steering the conversation back to his rehearsed one-liners, at one point actually checking his watch on air, a breach of television etiquette that did not go unnoticed by the studio audience, or by Carson, whose famous smile momentarily faltered. Another flashpoint developed in 1982, when Hope's traditional Thanksgiving special was scheduled directly against a rare primetime Carson interview special featuring Elizabeth Taylor. The counter-programming move struck Carson's team as deliberately antagonistic. NBC could easily have scheduled the programs on different nights. Network executive Brandon Tartikoff found himself caught between the two camps, attempting to placate both men while privately acknowledging to his deputies that managing these two egos is like trying to put two male lions in the same cage. The ratings battle ended in Carson's favor, a symbolic changing of the guard that network insiders recognized as a pivotal moment in NBC's star hierarchy. And that's when everything changed. By the early 1980 seconds, the television landscape was evolving. Carson's influence had grown beyond mere ratings. He had become a cultural touchstone, the standard by which all other talk show hosts were measured. Hope, meanwhile, found his once innovative comedy style increasingly viewed as anachronistic, his topical jokes too broad for changing audience tastes, his performance style too rigid for the more conversational era that Carson had helped usher in. The final rupture occurred in 1986 at NBC's 60th anniversary celebration, a lavish televised event featuring the network's biggest stars past and present. The setting was New York's Rockefeller Center, transformed for one night into a glittering tribute to television history. Both Hope and Carson were given prominent roles in the broadcast, with Carson slated to introduce a retrospective of NBC's comedy legacy. Minutes before the segment, producers informed Carson that the script had been modified. He would now be introducing Hope, who would then present the comedy retrospective himself. The last-minute change had come from network president Grant Tinker, acting on Hope's request. Carson, famous for his professionalism, made no scene but simmered with quiet rage at what he viewed as yet another instance of Hope leveraging his legendary status to claim the spotlight. The cavernous Studio 8 Hours, home to Saturday Night Live, and now the epicenter of NBC's Diamond Jubilee, buzzed with activity. Technicians adjusted lights, stars reviewed cue cards, and network executives mingled nervously, aware of the last-minute programming change but oblivious to its emotional impact. Carson, in his dressing room, reviewed the revised script with longtime producer Peter Lassily. "Again?" was all he said, but the single word carried the weight of decades of accumulated frustration. Lassily, who had witnessed the Hope-Carson dynamic for years, simply nodded. No further explanation was necessary between them. Backstage after the segment, in a narrow corridor away from the celebrities and cameras, Carson finally confronted Hope directly. According to a stagehand who overheard the exchange, Carson's normally measured tone gave way to ice-cold fury. 60 years of NBC, and you still can't help making it the Bob Hope Show. There's a reason your name has Hope in it, because hoping for humility from you is all we can do. Hope, then 83 years old but still sharp-tongued, reportedly fired back. "When you've entertained the troops in 3 wars and made people laugh for 6 decades, then you can tell me how to do my job, kid." The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but formalized what many had long suspected: these two comedy giants, forced to orbit each other in the same network galaxy, shared nothing but mutual contempt beneath their public personas. The confrontation occurred in a service corridor, festooned with hastily hung NBC memorabilia, vintage photographs, and promotional posters that chronicled the network's 6 decades, including images of both men in their respective primes. The irony of their private battle playing out against this backdrop of shared institutional history was lost on neither man. As they parted ways, returning to their respective entourages, NBC page Kevin Sullivan, who had witnessed the exchange while guiding a group of affiliates through a back entrance, observed that they looked like two gunfighters walking away from a duel, both wounded but neither willing to acknowledge the hit. Now, if you're wondering how such a significant feud could remain largely hidden from public view for so long, the answer lies partly in the media landscape of the era and partly in the professional discipline of both men. Unlike today's celebrity culture, where private conflicts are dissected in real time across social media platforms, the entertainment journalism of the Carson Hope era operated with greater deference to star power and network publicity departments. Both men understood that open warfare would damage not only their personal brands, but the NBC institution they both helped build. The consequences of this rivalry manifested in subtle but significant ways throughout the remainder of both men's careers. Carson, already selective about his public appearances, became even more circumspect about which NBC special events he would participate in, particularly if Hope was involved. He declined to appear in any of Hope's 90th birthday celebrations and was conspicuously absent from tributes to Hope's half-century in television. The 1,988 Emmy Awards presented a particularly telling tableau. Carson, receiving the Governor's Award for his contributions to television, delivered a gracious acceptance speech that referenced numerous comedy influences, from Jack Benny to Groucho Marx, but made no mention of Hope, despite the elder comedian's presence in the audience. Television critics noted the omission, but few understood its deliberate nature. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium that night became the stage for a masterclass in polite erasure, as Carson effectively wrote Hope out of his comedic lineage with nothing more than strategic silence. Hope continued making Tonight Show appearances, But eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that after 1986, he was increasingly interviewed by guest hosts rather than Carson himself. When Carson did interview Hope, the segments were shorter, more perfunctory, with none of the warmth or spontaneity that characterized Carson's best interviews. Industry insiders understood the choreography for what it was: two professionals fulfilling contractual obligations while maintaining maximum personal distance. A particularly awkward episode occurred in January 1990 when Hope appeared on The Tonight Show to promote his NBC special, Bob Hope's Christmas with the Troops and Other Friends. Carson's body language throughout the segment spoke volumes. He leaned away rather than toward his guest, offered fewer of his trademark supportive nods, and his laugh, usually so generous with guests, seemed mechanical and timed. Backstage afterwards, makeup artist Marvin Westmore overheard Carson mutter to his producer, "That's the last one. I don't care what the network says." The contrast in their career twilights could not have been more stark. Carson, ever protective of his legacy, chose to retire in 1992 while still at the top of his game. His final broadcast was a dignified, emotion-filled farewell, watched by 55 million Americans. He then disappeared almost completely from public view, granting no interviews and making only 2 brief television appearances in the remaining 15 years of his life. "I have done the work," he told close friend Don Rickles. "I have nothing left to prove." Carson's meticulous attention to his legacy extended to his archival choices. His personal production company, Carson Productions, maintained tight control over Tonight Show reruns and clip packages. Television historians and documentary producers noted a curious pattern. Hope's numerous appearances were rarely included in retrospectives or Best of Carson compilations. When Entertainment Weekly approached Carson in 1999 about a potential television legends photo spread featuring him alongside other NBC icons, including Hope, Carson's representative politely declined, citing the former host's desire to remain out of the public eye rather than the specific company proposed. Hope, conversely, seemed unable to step away from the spotlight. He continued performing well into his 90 seconds, long after his comedy had lost its edge, and his performances had become painfully dependent on cue cards and teleprompters. His annual Christmas specials, once rating juggernauts, gradually declined in viewership and relevance. By the mid-1,990 seconds, critics were openly questioning why NBC continued to air what many considered embarrassing showcases of a once great talent in decline. The 1996 Hope Christmas special drew particular criticism. Filmed at the Naval Base in San Diego, the 93-year-old Hope required visible assistance navigating the stage and repeatedly lost his place in the script. The New York Times television critic Walter Goodman wrote what many viewers were thinking. "One wishes NBC had the courage to suggest to their greatest star that some legacies are best preserved by knowing when to exit the stage." Network executives, caught between respect for Hope's historic contributions and the reality of his diminished capabilities, found themselves in an impossible position that Carson had neatly avoided through his decisive retirement. When Carson died in 2005, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Hope, then 101, and in failing health himself, released a brief statement through his publicist praising Carson's contributions to American entertainment. The tepid acknowledgement spoke volumes about their unresolved animosity. When Hope died later that same year, his funeral was attended by numerous Hollywood legends and political figures, but no representatives from Carson's family or inner circle were present. The syndication of Carson's Tonight Show episodes created another fascinating chapter in their posthumous relationship. Carson Productions, which owned most of his shows, initially excluded most Hope appearances from the packages sold to cable networks, an editorial decision that effectively diminished Hope's presence in the documented history of the show. Only in recent years have some of these appearances been included in digital archives and retrospectives. Documentary filmmaker Peter Jones, who produced the 2012 PBS documentary Johnny Carson, King of Late Night, encountered this archival selectivity firsthand. When we requested footage of Hope's Tonight Show appearances for our documentary, we found surprising gaps in what was made available. Jones noted in a 2013 interview with the Television Academy Foundation. It was as if Carson had curated his own legacy to minimize certain relationships, Hope's being the most notable. In many ways, their feud embodied a fundamental transition in American comedy and celebrity culture. Hope represented an older tradition, the vaudevillian showman who delivered punchlines with mechanical precision, who viewed television as merely another stage for his established persona. Carson pioneered something more intimate and authentic: comedy as conversation, celebrity as revelation, the talk show as a nightly communion between host and audience. The stylistic divide between them extended to their relationships with writers. Hope, famously dependent on his writing team, rarely ventured beyond scripted material in public appearances. Former Hope writer Mel Shavelson revealed in his memoir that Hope once panicked when he couldn't find his cue cards before a USO show, saying, "Without those jokes, I'm just an old man with bad eyes." Carson, while equally reliant on writers for his monologues, prided himself on his ability to conduct unscripted interviews and to find humor in the moment rather than the prepared page. Now, if you're wondering why this particular clash of titans remains so hidden from public view for decades, the answer lies in the vastly different media landscape of their era. Without social media to amplify conflicts, without gossip websites to dissect every facial expression and perceived slight, celebrities of the Carson-Hope era maintained tight control over their public images. Network publicity departments worked diligently to protect their valuable properties, ensuring that any hints of discord remained firmly behind closed doors. The few journalists who did pick up on the tension found their inquiries stonewalled by representatives from both camps. When Washington Post television critic Tom Shales attempted to address the rumored feud in a 1987 profile of Carson, the host's longtime publicist Jim Mahoney shut down that line of questioning with practiced efficiency. Johnny respects Bob's contributions to entertainment. Next question. Hope's team employed similar deflection tactics, ensuring that the public narratives of both men remained unsullied by acknowledgement of their private antipathy. The Carson-Hope antagonism reveals something fundamental about the nature of legacy and respect in entertainment. Two men, both masters of their craft but from different generations and with profoundly different approaches to television, found themselves unable to reconcile their differences, despite or perhaps because of their parallel journeys to the pinnacle of American celebrity. Carson's resentment stemmed not from petty jealousy, but from a genuine belief in the integrity of his format, a format that valued spontaneity and connection over rehearsed routines. Hope's inability to adapt to this new paradigm, his insistence on treating The Tonight Show as simply another venue for his monologues, represented everything Carson had worked to evolve beyond in late-night television. Their conflict wasn't just personal, it was philosophical, a clash between two visions of what entertainment should be. Television historian David Mark, author of Comic Visions, Television Comedy and American Culture, contextualized their rivalry as emblematic of a larger shift in American entertainment. Hope represented the comedian as performer, delivering jokes to an audience, while Carson embodied the comedian as host, creating a space for humor to emerge organically. The transition from one model to the other wasn't just a stylistic evolution, but a fundamental reimagining of the relationship between entertainer and audience. Those who worked with both men often found themselves caught in the crossfire of competing loyalties. Writer Martha Bolton, who wrote for Hope in the 1,980 seconds after earlier work with Carson's team, observed the contrast in their approaches. Bob viewed jokes as construction materials, solid, dependable building blocks to be assembled into a reliable structure. Johnny saw them more as conversation starters, jumping off points for something potentially more interesting. Neither approach was inherently superior, but they were fundamentally incompatible. The power dynamics at NBC complicated their relationship further. Hope, with his decades-long history at the network and personal relationships with successive generations of executives, operated with an institutional authority that even Carson's ratings dominance couldn't fully challenge. Carson, meanwhile, wielded the more immediate power of cultural relevance, his nightly presence in American living rooms giving him a currency that Hope's occasional specials couldn't match. The network, dependent on both men for different aspects of its identity and success, had no choice but to navigate their Cold War with diplomatic caution. What remains most poignant about this hidden feud is how unnecessary it seems in retrospect. Both men achieved everything television could offer: wealth, influence, the adoration of millions. Yet neither could find room for genuine respect or admiration for the other's contributions to their shared medium. Perhaps that, more than anything, speaks to the complicated psychology of stardom, how the very traits that drive people to seek the spotlight can sometimes make it impossible for them to share it gracefully. The Carson-Hope rivalry also illustrates how television, despite its intimacy and immediacy, can conceal as much as it reveals. Millions watched both men for decades, believing they knew them through their on-screen personas, never glimpsing the complex, sometimes petty, always human dynamics that played out behind the cameras. In that sense, their feud reminds us that television's greatest illusion isn't just the content it partakes to delivers, but the authentic connection it appears to forge between viewer and performer. If this story has moved you, perhaps the best way to honor both men's legacies is to appreciate them for what they were rather than what they couldn't be to each other. Watch Carson's masterful interviews where his quiet curiosity draws unexpected warmth from his guests. Revisit Hope's tireless performances for troops abroad, bringing laughter to those who needed it most. In their work, if not in their relationship, each man left an indelible mark on American culture that transcends their private animosity. In the end, the Carson-Hope feud tells us something essential about fame itself: how the pursuit of legacy can both motivate extraordinary achievement and foster unnecessary division. Two comedians who made millions laugh together could never quite laugh with each other. There's both irony and profound sadness in that truth, a reminder that even at the height of success, the human capacity for connection remains fragile and sometimes elusive, even for those whose life's work was connecting with audiences.